Welcome to Heresy, the Horus Heresy talk show. In this video, we're going to be talking all about Legion Sky Hunter squadrons for Horus Heresy, the Age of Darkness. We're going to be talking about the stats, strengths, and weaknesses of Sky Hunter squadrons, the rider and the jetbike weapon and equipment options that you've got available. And then we're going to talk through tactics for using this unit and some guidance for how to load them out to be most effective as well. But before we do that, if you enjoy the content, please do like and subscribe on YouTube. And don't forget to join us as well in our Discord channel, the Heresy Discord community. That's linked in the video description down below. And now on with the show. The basic stats of a Scimitar Jetbike Sky Hunter Squadron model are a Space Marine, pretty much. So same stats as a normal Space Marine, except they've got 2 wounds, and obviously they've got the bike that modifies their stats as well. Now, this is quite a departure for a lot of people from older jet bikes and lots of other Warhammer games where they generally have +1 toughness, and this has caused this unit to be frowned upon a little bit. You know, a lot of people have looked at this and said they're too expensive, they're not toughness 5 anymore, they're too easy to kill, therefore they're not very good. And I don't agree with that. I actually think they're a pretty good unit. So let's look at what else to do. Well, they're cavalry. Now, if you don't know what cavalry does, it means they're not slowed by difficult terrain, but difficult terrain becomes dangerous terrain. Luckily, they've got the anti-grav subtype as well, which means that dangerous terrain only matters if they end their move in it. So effectively, they get to ignore difficult terrain, and it's not even dangerous as long as they don't stop in it, which is great. They can't be pinned, which is quite a big deal. Pinning's super powerful in this game, and being immune to pinning is a really good thing to have. And when they fall back as well, they fall back 3d6. Now, because they've got the hit and run ability, that means that they get to fall back when they're hit and running further than they normally would as well. So that's also pretty good. The jetbike gives them a 16-inch move. It gives them the anti-grav trait, which lets them effectively just ignore all kinds of terrain, move straight over it, which is great when you want to hide them behind a building or a big rock, and then they can just move straight over it and pop out. So as well as being 16-inch move, they get to ignore everything, which makes them effectively faster than 16 inches even at getting around the battlefield. And if they do run, which might not be all the time because you'll mostly be wanting to shoot at them, but if they do run, they get shrouded as well from their jet bikes. Now, they can also deep strike, which is a great thing to have access to, even if you won't do it all the time. And they are relentless, and they have firing protocols too. So relentless means that they can move and fire their heavy weapons with no issues. And it also means as well, the firing protocols, if the Marines take pistols, which we'll look at in a bit, they can fire the bike's weapon as well as the pistol too. This also means as well that they can charge after shooting because of relentless, which is also a good thing, as we'll talk about in a little bit. So what are the strengths of this unit then? Well, obviously they're very fast and they're very mobile. They get to ignore terrain. They get to ignore all sorts of stuff. And they're a heavy weapons platform. Ultimately, that's the main thing they do, which I don't think is necessarily super obvious when you think bike in a Warhammer game, but effectively they're a mobile heavy weapons platform, which is not a thing that's super common. Tanks can do it, but they obviously struggle to get around the battlefield quite often because of their size and their speed. They don't move anywhere near as fast as these. Also, tanks are quite vulnerable to just being shot by heavy weapons and blowing up, and they're quite expensive. And although the jet bikes are expensive, they're not quite as expensive as tanks. You can use deep strike offensively or defensively, so you can keep these in the sky, drop them down and shoot something and, threaten your opponent with that. But you can also put them in deep strike defensively so your opponent can't shoot them off the board as well. Obviously, you can also just choose not to deep strike, but it's a good option to have depending on the table, your opponent, your missions, and all that kind of stuff. Hit and run's also a really good ability with a unit that's this mobile. It enables some interesting tricks with locking down enemy units in melee. So this is, particularly enemy heavy support squads, which are ever present in the game of Horus Heresy, really, as we all know. So you can charge an enemy unit, a heavy support squad with these. You can have a fight. It'll probably be a slap fight. Both units won't really do much to each other with basic weapons, unless you charge a heavy support squad that's got a power weapon sergeant, which is super uncommon. And then you can leave your unit in combat. So in the enemy turn, this means your unit is immune to being shot, which is great. It also means the enemy unit can't shoot as well. And after the second round of melee, in the enemy's turn, you can then fall back using hit and run, and your unit is free to go off and do something again. And that's a really powerful tactic. If you go into combat with a fighty enemy unit, it's not going to work so well. But if there's an enemy unit that's just going to slap you around a little bit, like a tactical squad or a heavy support squad, maybe even a 5-man heavy support squad, you get yourself safety and you stop them shooting, which is a super great thing to do and really easy to do with the speed of the unit and the fact it can, charge over obstacles and stuff. Immune to pinning from cavalry is just a generically good thing to be immune to, really. Also, as well, this is a denial unit. And any denial unit, if you're playing decent missions anyway, maybe not all the book missions, but some of them, or some other missions you may play that, custom missions that are a bit more objective focused, mobile denial units like this can be super powerful, game winning even if you throw them away and they die to deny an objective sometimes, that in itself can be enough to win you games. And that's a really good thing to be able to do. Again, you can see that the strength of this unit, although it's effectively a mobile heavy weapons platform, we're starting to build up a picture where this unit can actually do an awful lot of different things just because of its speed and its maneuverability. Last, but by no means least, it comes in a fast attack slot as well. Now, the fast attack slot is certainly the least popular slot in Space Marine armies. The heavy support slot is always contested. The elite slot can get quite busy sometimes if you've got a lot of dreadnoughts and some Legion-specific units, etc. So these are essentially in a slot that is always open as well, which is also a nice thing to be. They do have some weaknesses as well, though, like all units. So the biggest one is that they're somewhat expensive per model. Absolutely, at 35 points each in a unit of 3 or 30 points per model when you upgrade the unit, that is a lot of points for something that is effectively just a Space Marine stat line with 2 wounds. They're not hard to kill if you shoot them. They're not particularly hard to kill. Although when you compare these against heavy support squads, which get 5 models for effectively the same points, which we all think is generally a very powerful unit, it's not actually that bad because these have actually got 1 more wound total than a heavy support squad, and they only lose a model every 2 wounds instead of degrading every 1 wound. So really, although it feels like these are super expensive, they're actually not that bad. If you use them like a different type of heavy support squad, they're not that bad. But they are very vulnerable to instant death on the flip side to that. If you're getting shot by strength 8 weapons, you will lose models very quickly, and you will be losing quite expensive models very quickly. It's also a small squad size as well. So as an example, 1 model gets killed, they're going to be taking a morale test, which is a little bit of a problem. And they have quite limited weapon options, unfortunately, as well. So although they are maybe comparable to heavy support squads in their role in bringing a heavy weapon, they can only bring multi-melters, plasma cannons, or culverins. So no las cannons, which are one of the most powerful weapons, and no other options like heavy flamers either. The last thing is these are quite reliant on player skill to deliver value, I think. And I list this as a weakness because even the best player makes mistakes. And even the best player, if you've got less things to think about, like, if you're just pointing and shooting a heavy weapon squad, it's one less thing to think about in terms of, working with your overall army when you're trying to make sure you make the right moves every turn. So the fact that these are a bit harder to play, you've got to really think about their positioning, really think about, when you commit them or what they're trying to hunt down and kill is a little bit of a weakness compared to other units. On the upside, when you play these well, I think it feels really good. You've used a unit that is a little bit more interesting than just point and shoot. And if you execute it well and pull off good stuff with them, it can feel really great. So although it's a technical weakness, it actually makes the unit really fun to play as well. Let's take a look at the weapon options then. So the first is the Volkite Culverin. So an excellent weapon for 5 points, as it always is when we get it for cheap, like we do on heavy support squads. It's pretty effective versus some vehicles in the side or rear armor, which these bikes can definitely get to. So whirlwinds, which are a powerful unit, predators as well, these can easily get in the side or the rear of them and just strip off all their hit points and blow them up, which is really great. They're also very long ranged at 45 inches as well. So you can, stand these off from some weird fire angle that they can find between some buildings where not much stuff might be able to shoot them at long range. Things can't catch them in melee. Or you might be able to just go straight down a flank and then come around the back of a flank and, shoot a whirlwind in the back from halfway across the table. There's loads of stuff you can do with the combination of super long range and super mobile, whilst only being 5 points per model as well to add this, which really does keep the cost of the unit down. The other good thing about this is when the unit is so cheap, some of the other upgrades, like the pistols, become a little bit more attractive. So I really like the Volkite Culverin. I think it's one of the best 2 out of the 3 options. The other great option at the other end of the price spectrum is the multi-melter. So these are 15 points each, which is quite a lot of points, and it is more than a heavy support squad pays for them as well. Is very powerful, obviously. Multi-melters are really great when they're in range, and these vehicles have got the speed to close to that range. The only problem is, at 12 inches away from wherever they're shooting, if that thing is in the middle of the enemy army, they're going to be quite vulnerable to being attacked back. Now, that might be okay. Putting 3 multi-melters into the side or rear of an enemy vehicle and destroying it is probably worth throwing away a 150-point unit a lot of the time, but it can be harder to use the multi-melters. They can punish enemies for trying to flank with their own vehicles, though. You know, if your enemy's got a Predator or a Sakaran or something like that trying to flank, one of these coming down, a unit of these coming down the flank to go and shoot them is a pretty dangerous situation for that enemy tank to be in. It's a good option. The multi-melter, I like it as well. Definitely plays a bit different because they're a little bit more expensive. But, you know, certainly if these are going to hunt things like whirlwinds down, they're going to kill the whirlwind. The whirlwind is going to be dead. You've just got to try to put yourself in a position where you are alive the turn after doing that. The third option is the plasma cannon, which I also think is a great option. I don't have a lot more to say about this other than it's good at killing elites, like all plasma weapons are. Unfortunately, not strength 8, so a bit less good at killing things like Terminators because you've got to hit them twice. But it does breach. It does wound on a 2+. It is good at killing bunches of Marines. Again, you're probably going to get more kills with this than the Volkite Culverin if what you're doing is just shooting at units of, you know, bunched up Space Marines. And it's another good option. It's got a good enough range as well, 36 inches, you know, to still be able to play at range if you want to, and also a good weapon option. None of these are bad. I like all 3 of them. I think you could easily use all 3 of them. I do think you could, in theory, even mix and match as well, which is quite unusual. I think you could easily take like 2 Volkite Culverins and a multi-melter in a unit or something like that. I don't think that would be inefficient to do. I think that would hold up quite well. So you can easily use any of these and your unit will do well with them, although they'll just have different favoured targets. The riders have weapon options as well, and because of the firing protocols, they can fire these as well as their own guns. So they can get a hand flamer for 2 points. Now, I think that's actually pretty good. 6 points gets you 3 flamer templates. That will kill a lot of Solar Auxilia models with the way you can position these models, maybe Volkite Culverins as well. 3 hand flamers will kill a lot of Solar Auxilia. And for 6 points, I think that's pretty good. It will also add quite a few hits to Marine units if you position it quite well as well. Flamers can be quite powerful even though they're low strength and the enemy still gets saves against them. So if you are going to consider going up close, we'll talk about that a bit more in a minute, you could certainly do worse than spending 6 points on hand flamers for your unit as well, which is also quite cool. You know, Marines coming up with flamers while firing the bikes at the same time. You've also got the Volkite Serpenter option. So these are a bit better than the flamers, and they've got very slightly longer range at 10 inches, but they're 5 points each, which I think is too expensive, really, for, you know, what these do. Obviously, they have Deflagrate as well, so they're sometimes going to do a few extra hits. But if you're going to take pistols, I would probably take hand flamers or nothing, because these are not worth 3 points each over the hand flamer, I don't think. But if you do want to use them, or you just want to put one on a model for cool factor, I think they pair quite well with the Volkite Culverins, because when you do go in close, it's just more shots to that volume of fire. And again, there are reasons to go in close, which we'll talk about in a minute. Power weapons are the last option, so you can take any power weapon or a lightning claw. So lightning claws and power weapon the same points, so lightning claw would generally come out on top. Although in theory, the Space Marine can get +1 attack from having 2 weapons. You know, I'm guessing he just like rides the bike with his legs or something. So, you know, you could use a power sword for an extra attack over the lightning claw. If your unit is going to go into melee with like squishy enemy units like heavy support squads or tactical squads, you can certainly do worse than putting a power weapon on the sergeant, especially if you're playing something that gets like bonus attacks or bonus to wound, like one of the more melee focused Marine Legions. You get a little bit more value out of these, and it does turn, you know, like a 2-way slap fight into you just killing a bunch of men and then maybe hitting running away, or maybe just killing the unit over 2 turns. So certainly with the speed of these and the way you can position them, these can certainly be worth it. Also, lots of Legions have got their own special power weapons as well, which is also worth considering. I would probably pair these with Volkite culverins most of the time as well. You don't want your 15-point multi-melters being in combat quite as much. Maybe they won't get to shoot a little bit more vulnerable when they're going into combat, so I'd probably keep them cheap and use culverins if you're going to use power weapons, but certainly a good option as well. And again, a cool thing to do by going into combat, chopping people down. You do have a power fist option too, but I'd probably avoid that. It's a bit too expensive at 20 points. You probably don't want to be attacking second. You probably want to kill a few Marines before they hit your bikes, reduce the chance of them just like taking a bike out. Also as well, in terms of like destroying things like armor, which is a thing you could use these for. Not the worst idea in the world, but also not the best use of 20 points, I don't think. So I would probably skip that option. You can also take a Nuncio Vox. Now, with the speed of this unit, you will be able to get line of sight to pretty much anything you want, which is good, but it does pump the cost of the unit up, and it's already an expensive unit. So if you can put a Nuncio Vox on something else, like a tactical squad, it's probably better. But, if this unit is going to be fire and plasma, or if nothing else in your army rather, can carry the Vox, then certainly an upgrade you might consider. I like the Legion Vexillor on this unit as well. +1 to combat results is really good if you are doing the hit and run style attacks. Maybe you've got a power weapon, just gives you more chance. You're not going to be smashing people in combat with these, but you might be winning by 1 or 2, and having an extra 1 just means you got that little bit more chance of breaking enemy units as well. Also handy for stopping slightly larger units running off the table as well. If you do break and you have got a slightly larger unit, the price of this becomes, a little bit more of a safety net against just an unlucky leadership role, which we all have sometimes. Ultimately, like the Nuncio Vox, a little bit on the expensive side, but worth considering if you've got the spare points. Plus, I think like a bike with a big banner on the back or an icon or something like that would also look really cool as a conversion. Let's also just point out some Legion-specific options for using these as well. Unsurprisingly, White Scars do it well in Shogorian Brotherhood, so these become a line. So everything that I said about denial units goes double when these all become line and they all become scoring. Obviously, that's great. And obviously, if you're a White Scars player, you probably want to take these anyway, because that's the kind of thing you're into. So they work really well there, especially if you're playing a lot of objective missions. Iron Hands are a particularly good user of bikes as well, because the -1 strength on enemy shooting mitigates their main weakness of being killed by strength 8 weapons, and also means that, like if your enemy is shooting them with bolters or something like that, they're going to have a much harder time doing it. Iron Hand's ability is just generally very good, but particularly works well with stopping these being instant death. Iron Warriors, last of all, any high volume, high strength weapon works really well with Iron Warriors. So Volkite culverins being strength 7 against enemy vehicles, particularly if you might be getting them in the side, turns them from good vehicle hunters to great vehicle hunters if they're going to do that. Likewise with multi-melters, a multi-melter still needs an average roll to penetrate a Land Raider, but, the +1 strength really makes a big difference. And if you are going to suicide or effectively suicide the unit of these to take out a big enemy tank, Iron Warriors make them do better. So I think they're probably the 3 legions that make best use of them, although they are good for pretty much all legions, I think. So how do you use these on the battlefield then? Well, effectively, they're a mobile-heavy weapon platform first and foremost. They can use their speed to dictate range, so they can keep at long range if they want to. They can be at short range if they want to be, or they can position themselves in good positions with good cover if that cover's available as well. You can find those firing angles where, you might be safe or where the enemy thought they were safe from, or you can easily get beads on targets the enemy wants to hide. Whether that's a scoring unit trying to stay out of line of sight while it's on an objective, or a Whirlwind Scorpius hiding at the back of the battlefield. You're really good at putting guns on the things you want to put guns on. Shooting vehicles in the side or rear is obviously a powerful use for these, particularly with Volkite or multi-melter weapons as well. They can also be a disruption unit as well, so they can melee enemy shooting units, as we've mentioned, enemy heavy weapon squads, or even tactical squads and things like that, particularly when they're isolated and don't have another unit that can come to their assistance in melee. Using the hit and run tactic I talked about before can be really powerful as well. And also as well, just being able to deny objectives further adds to their abilities as a disruption unit. If you add a power weapon to the unit, they can also become more than a disruption unit in melee. They can actually become a unit that can just take enemy units out quite easily, particularly if they're squishy targets. But the thing I really like about bikes is that they can do both of those things with the same loadout. They can be a mobile heavy weapons platform and a disruption unit at the same time. Maybe not both on the same turn all the time, but being able to switch from providing fire support to suddenly locking down an enemy unit or denying objective halfway across the board is a super powerful option to have. And although these are expensive on a per model basis, they just give you so many options. And a lot of armies that we build and play today just don't have these options. You just don't have that instant mobility that also comes with, reasonably big guns at the same time. So they're fantastically flexible for what you pay for them. You do want to avoid enemy strength 8 weapons like the Plague, though, because they will make short work of your very expensive bikes, particularly if you've got multi-melters on them. A good way to use jet bikes is to use them in an army with other tough units. So, dreadnoughts, tanks, maybe terminators, things that the enemy wants to shoot with their strength 8 weapons. You want them to be part of that saturation so that your enemy can't just shoot their strength 8 guns at these without missing the chance to shoot at something else, their strength 8 guns to shoot at. And what you'll find is if you use these in an army with, plenty of other armor, dreadnoughts, tough things, etc., which we all try to get in most of our armies, or just other threats that are more imminent than these a lot of the time, you'll find the enemy just won't shoot at them very much, particularly if you make them difficult to shoot by the positioning. You can keep them reasonably safe and keep them around to get a lot of work in with those heavy weapons. Another thing about the tactics for these is they are an option that a lot of armies just don't have access to normally. So I've got these in my Iron Hands army. My Iron Hands army otherwise has very little in the way of mobility or very little in the way of, reaching out and touching an enemy Scorpius or something like that. So part of what you're paying for in the price of these is that flexibility and is the ability to add this kind of tactical width to your army. And it's often a thing that your opponent won't have. So a lot of enemy armies won't have things like javelins or jet bikes or any fast flying style units in them. And you'll have an advantage when you have and they haven't, because you can dictate the pace of the game a little bit more. And your opponent will have to guard against units going where they maybe don't really want them to go. You can also, in a very simple way, just use jet bikes to fill a hole in your army when you need more heavy weapons. If your heavy support slots are all used up, maybe you're like Leviathans, maybe you've taken a Land Raider and a heavy support slot because you don't want to dedicate a transport somewhere. You want to start with your unit out of it or something. Maybe your heavy support slots are full, but you want more guns in your army. And this is a way of just using a fast attack slot in a reasonably cost-efficient way, still compared to heavy support squads, to just get more heavy weapons in the army. Even at that very basic level, these are fine. They work really well in a combined arms role. Ultimately, I think is a good takeaway from this. They're not going to hold the line for you, in the face of oncoming enemy stuff. They're not going to win a heavy shootout with more cost-efficient units or tougher units or anything like that. What they are going to do is complement other units in your army, work with the other units, give you the ability to do things that your army might not otherwise be able to do. And for that reason, I think these are a good unit, definitely worthy of your consideration. So a quick look at loadouts, because everyone always likes this to be specific. Well, firstly, as with all units, don't overspend. If you're going to take multi-melters, you probably want to avoid most of the other upgrades. Otherwise, the unit just becomes too attractive a target, and it is worth your enemy hunting them down and killing them. Volkite culverins are excellent, as I've said, and they do keep the cost down. So if you do want to put power weapons or hand flamers or maybe other equipment on the unit, Volkite culverins are a good way to do that. Get that cool stuff into the unit, still have it be effective, but not have it be overly expensive. Extra jet bikes in the unit are priced pretty well at 30 points as well. You've just got to be aware of, the unit's breakpoint and the fact that you might be making the unit a bit harder to hide. They've got quite big bases. The models are quite big and long. On some tables, it might be difficult to hide them, and they really like being able to hide behind stuff and then pop out or flank and stuff. So bear that in mind. I would probably run these in units of 3 or 4 most of the time. 5, at the absolute maximum, before you're probably investing too much into the unit. But you might find other reasons, particularly if you're playing something like White Guards, to do more than that. But I would probably try to keep them small. Also means if you do lose a model and they happen to break and run away, you've minimized the loss as well. So in summary, I do think they're an underrated unit, and I think they bring a good new tactical dimension to lots of army builds. I don't think you should spam them. I don't think they are so cheap that you should be using, even multiple units. Maybe just one unit or 2 units is a good thing to add to your army. But I do think they are underrated, mostly because of the sort of sticker shock of them not having toughness 5 anymore. They're very playable. I think even in highly competitive armies, if that's your jam in the way you play Heresy, I think you can get a lot of value out of these just because of the flexibility. And if you are playing objective heavy missions, which you probably should be if you're playing competitive Heresy, if you want decent or half decent games, then these can add a lot to the army. And ultimately as well, regardless of how you play Heresy, they add some variety to your army. So we've all got lots of tanks and dreadnoughts and infantry, and our armies look cool, but jetbikes are something that is very uniquely Heresy because the Space Marines don't have them in 40k. And also as well, with the new plastic kits, they're very easy to convert. They just look a bit different to the other units they've got on your army. So also a bit of variety, whilst also giving you some good tactical options that also I think are very fun to play with on the tabletop as well. That's the end of the show. I hope you've enjoyed it. I've certainly enjoyed talking about a new and slightly different unit type. Please do leave me a like and subscribe on YouTube if you enjoy the content. And don't forget to check out the Heresy community on Discord, which is linked in the video description below. I'll see you all soon. Thanks very much, and bye-bye.